Okay, welcome back to another episode of this podcast. And today we want to talk about the long-awaited Malaysian budget 2023. And here with me today is Lyra.
Hello.
And this budget has been delayed since last year due to general elections. And we say it is highly anticipated because it is also Anwar Ibrahim's first major policy foray. And so a lot of anticipations. Some people even say it's make or break for him. But of course, we're coming in not from a tax expert point of view, not economist point of view, but we are just ordinary, concerned, tax-paying citizen.
Yep.
And so now, usually when people look at budget in the past, I think the first thing they went to look is tax rebate, right?
Yeah, what's in it for me?
Is that what you usually do?
Well, sort of. I mean, the high level, I will definitely look at, okay, what are the major things that have been highlighted? And then, only then, okay, let's look at the exact things.
Now, let me ask you right from the beginning, why is tax rebate important?
Well, I think it just goes to show how we're going to spend money for the year.
Yeah, and I think because you see the whole taxation, yes, to get enough revenue, but also in a free market kind of condition, we want to encourage people to spend, to invest properly. And I think that's where some of the feedback on this budget comes in, that are we going to see more encouragement, more stimulations of development and spending, or are we going to go back to the same old handout, plug the hole kind of thing? But before we go there, we're jumping ahead of ourselves. Let's look at Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's speech, okay? And I think we had the first article. Now, by the way, the whole speech was actually in article form, and you all can go and have a look. It's pretty interesting. I find it interesting because he started off with a reference of Joseph. Now, of course, the story of Joseph was in Quran, but also in Bible, where he was in Egypt, and he sort of, Anwar Ibrahim used the word forecast, but, in the Bible it's called, it's really a prophecy, that there will be 7 years of economic downturn. Now, the main point Prime Minister was making was that to combat this, we need, first thing he said, trustworthiness, honesty, transparency. So far, so good?
Yep.
And then he said we need quick actions based on the knowledge. So when you have the revelations and forecasts, you are able to hopefully, it's like if you know the future, maybe you can do something to avoid the fate of the future. I mean, in recent times, so many sci-fi movies are talking about that. And then he went on to say that he has diagnosed 5 issues with Malaysia. And I'm just going to quickly summarize it because I think Prime Minister was on the right track. Indeed. In terms of the diagnosis. He said, number one, government inherited a high debt burden. Inherited, of course, from Perikatan Nasional, from Ismail Sabri, Then number 2, he said decline in governance, and he's going into the corruption, the waste. And yeah, there is a need to reform that. Number 3, he said we are in a global economic uncertainty. Number 4, he said investments not recover to pre-pandemic. I think that much is obvious, even though, gems are coming back, in Klang Valley. And the last one, which I think is one that we're going to focus more on today, bread and butter issue for a lot of people. Now, I think he said the right thing or the right diagnosis, but let's get straight to the point. Do you think the budget reflects a remedy to all the things he has said?
No, I mean, he definitely did hit all the right notes. I mean, he even portrayed himself as a reformer. But the thing is, you are taxing the ultra-rich.
So is that your main problem with the tax from the get-go?
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to have a reform, you mentioned about corruption. Obviously, it is a systemic issue. So hence, it should have a systemic reform. And that should be reflected in the budget. I mean, after all, I think a lot of people voted for this government, this coalition. It's really because of his performance when he was the finance minister.
Yeah, that was so long ago, right?
Indeed, it was so long ago, and yet I guess people kind of have that sort of anticipation. We are being maybe the promise is a little bit oversold.
Yeah.
When you look at the budget, yes, it's fair to say that he has, well, it's only just been a couple of months. It's not even 100 days yet, reaching 100 days, but not 100 days yet. Maybe it's a little bit too harsh to be too critical of him. But he mentioned, it's like, if you already knew the future, surely your remedy has to reflect a way out of that.
Now, the whole trend, now we are just kind of digressing a little bit about taxing the rich. And now, of course, in US, you have politicians like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren from the far left, and really wanting to push, or you have Andrew Yang, who push for universal basic income, $1,000 per month. And it's really like, the whole thing to push the entire society into welfare state, into a nanny kind of state. Now the thing about taxing the rich is, I think people forget that they already paid the tax.
Indeed.
So we are talking about, and this also relates to the luxury goods taxation. It's like, I already paid the tax. If you think that what I'm paying is not correct, but mind you, Malaysian's personal tax is on the relative high side if you compare it with Singapore and other places. I mean, given the kind of facility and infrastructure provided by the government, it's like we are not like the Nordic states and things like that. So if you feel like certain category are not paying enough, then the issue is with your tax system, not with people. Not with you needing to increase the rate again. And now, of course,
drastic time calls for drastic measures. So if you already mentioned about the economic downturn, then some of these things are, the right thinking. If you're operating a company, for instance, and you have skyrocketing high expenses, of course, the first thing that you're looking at is the operational cost. Is it effective or not? So, but in this case, you're not really looking at the operational expenditure. You are instead looking elsewhere for
looking at the
increased revenue.
That's why I was asking you, the whole budget, is the issue more revenue or is it more expenses? Now, expenses, of course, is going to be complicated because of the systemic structure, which we're going to talk a little bit later. Now, one more thing, one last point I want to mention about the high income group. Really, on an individual basis, our tax system, there is very, very little personal tax waiver. So that means they almost always have to pay the full amount because, whereas if you are the T20 because of your business, then you can use your Sendirian you can use your structure. Remember a few years ago, the RRB kind of say, doctors cannot use a private vehicle to run their business in a specialist center and things like that because they get so much tax waiver. And that's the thing, is like, you are taxing, you are, I don't want to use the word discriminating, but you are really not giving the right opportunity to do business, because at the end of the day, these people are doing business. They are in the line of business.
This kind of just reminds me of the infamous Liz Truss U-turn. Although despite her claiming to be likened to be like Margaret Thatcher, this lady is not for turning. The thing is, I think I personally would have preferred that model, as in if she would have really persisted through to have like tax cuts, and I think that would really generally help to boost the economy. Now, of course, the problem with UK was their socialist, green, ESG. It's like, again, to go back to Margaret Thatcher, her very famous maxim, eventually you run out of money. So we have both problems, I guess, revenue problems and expenses, and we're going to look at both. Now, another thing which some people say now, I know some of you will be like, okay, this sounds like pretty negative. And and in fact, remember, we were just saying that we wanted to invite one of my friends who is like a CFO, COO in a SMI listed company. And initially he said, he will give some points. Then he was, I had to talk to the camera, so maybe not. But he did say something very interesting. He said, well, if I'm doing a budget as a politician to get vote, this budget is neither here nor there. He said, I would have said, he said if he's finance minister, he would have said all those who earned 100,000 and below, no tax.
And he won't increase the T20 also, but instead we'll look at maybe a low level kind of GST. And maybe it's happening. I think there's a lot of rumbling and discussion that GST has to come back. But now, what's your take on GST? Are you in favor or not in favor?
I think there are
Putting you on the
some
spot.
benefit on GST. I mean, personally, I prefer GST model, to be honest. I mean, yes, I guess both ways it goes down to the end purchaser.
Yeah.
But GST doesn't seem like impacting the end purchaser more than SST.
Yep,
I mean,
yep.
I guess it's just a perception. I mean, there's no data to support it. But I think in general, I think it does help the whole country to navigate through. Especially, I think it really is beneficial to the companies.
Yeah, I guess the criticism at that time was that Najib was very desperate for revenue and it was very high, and a lot of categories which should have been exempted was not there. So, of course, Pakatan Rakyat, Pakatan Harapan coming in have to, one of their main manifesto, it's almost like their personal vendetta against Najib. And I guess that's the political obligation. So, yeah, but I've been hearing a lot of people say, look, if it's well managed, if it's reasonable, if certain category, like the last round, one of the most ridiculous GST was on real estate. It's like we are already paying ad valorem stamp duty up to 4%, and you want another 6%. What's happening? 10% for conveyancing? It's totally ridiculous, So these are the kind of implementation people are unhappy. But yeah, I mean that could be another thing. Now, another thing people say is this is basically Zafrul budget 2.0.
Yeah, I mean, obviously. I mean, it's just a bit of fine-tuning here and there.
And he's still a cabinet minister, by the way. I'm sure his feedback is there. But I can't really remember Zafrul's budget already. But it seems, I mean, if memory serves me right, it is, again, a lot of handout, right?
Yep.
A lot of handout. Now, what's the problem with handout? Now, we just kind of experienced COVID, and a lot of people are really in need. And, we're just discussing, what is the definition of poverty, even in Malaysia. I remember it was a very ridiculous kind of level, But then poverty really depends on where you stay, If you earn X amount of money, maybe you could make a living in a smaller town in East Malaysia, but not in Klang Valley, for example. So, but what do you think? This sort of handout, what's the problem with that?
I think like what our Prime Minister was saying, his goal was to eradicate the hardcore poverty.
Yep.
But the thing is, handouts actually just cause people to be trapped in that cycle forever. Because if you're not really teaching people a way out, like using very great incentive. So incentive, it's almost like you are penalizing some group of people to reward a certain group of people, but you're not really resolving the whole issue here per se, because you are not helping them to elevate their living so that they are able to really just come out of it. So I think handout is really bad in the sense that, because where do you draw the line? How do you define? I mean, we were just talking about how do we define the hardcore poor? I mean, if I just kind of like look through Department of Statistics, you can't really find the data. I think the data is not quite available yet.
Once upon a time, I sort of read like poverty is below 700, 800.
I think it's 1,005 and below
per household.
Yeah, I think so. But again, I think it depends on which state you are living.
Klang Valley, 1,005 per household. Definitely, I think you are below poverty. You can't even. You don't have enough to I mean, let's say it's a family of 4. There's no way you can sustain it.
Yep.
And so I guess, can we say, look, welfare, the handout, it is necessary in some situations, but the government should be focusing on eliminating this group. It's like, I mean, I see this budget and even the last few budget, it seems like those people who need handout are the majority. And they kind of speak about the failure of the entire economic policy for the last 50 years. If majority of people need handout. So I guess we're coming back to the NEP again. And we said NEP a few times, and there has been some minor acknowledgement that NEP didn't work. But I think from the elite, from the economists, nobody truly wanted to say it was a big bust,
Yeah, and handout, I think, is really detrimental to the middle class people.
Yeah.
Because you are really creating like different caste levels. So if let's say you have certain group of people who are just about to reach the threshold to go to middle class,
Yep.
but because of this handout, some people might prefer to stay just slightly below the line.
or like even like T20, we were just discussing like in Australia, for example, their individual tax rates is very, very high. And so some people just work and, work very closely with the accountant. And when they hit that kind of income, they just stop working.
Yep.
So no wonder a lot of them just take 3 months off, 4 months off, because there's no incentive. If I work, most of the earning will go to the government. So that's the thing. And remember, one of the criticism of this budget comes from Bersatu Wan Saiful, and now I think I can't remember the title of the article already, but
Class
he
war.
did use the word class war, and which find it very interesting because we use the word very often in this podcast.
Yeah.
And class war, of course, what is class war? Class war is basically you are pitting people within the same community against one another. And this is really the classic way, divide and conquer. So when you do that, you are creating a mob rule. So you're creating a group. Just now we just call them professional victims, right? So they are always like under siege. They are always perceived as not having enough. Now, of course, a lot of these in certain places, even in Malaysia, there's a racial, religious root, okay? And so that's why a lot of time when we look at what's happening, even with the black, the Hispanic in America, of course, here we have all our racial issues. But when you dive deeper, it's not the race, it's not the religion, it's the class, it's the elite against the non-elite. So of course, this one Saiful, I think he was probably referring specifically to the T20 kind of thing. But the class war, and he kind of alluded a little bit to socialism, he didn't use
communist?
Communism, he used the word communism and Marxism, and then of course, predictably you get party socialists come out and say, you know nothing and things like that. But here, of course, if you've been following our shows, we talk a lot about Marxism, about communism, about if people desire big governments, eventually it will lead to this. And that's why you see some of the things, even with environmental control, even with the use of electric car and things like that. These are all leading to control, behavior control. And COVID, we say so many times already, is just one of the great experiments, in terms of modifying human behavior. And with this, maybe let's look at another article that we sort of put in there, and which is 28th of February, just yesterday, on Free Malaysia Today, FMT. Do opinion polls, and maybe we can just put it out, do opinion polls spell doom for Anwar and his government? And this is one of the reasons why you should read the content. Now, by the way, the content doesn't nearly slam Prime Minister Anwar so bad. I mean, the only thing they say is, look, compare with year one of the popularity and year one of Mahathir's popularity. But how can you compare? It's like so far apart. And some more, let me see, the year one of Mahathir, is he talking about the 2018 or when Mahathir came in the 80s?
I think it was 80s.
2018, 80s, okay. Now, if you talk about 2018, I would say, look, there was just such a tremendous euphoria, and I think a lot of Malaysians are kind of outside reality for a while. People are like so happy and unreasonably so because they thought one elections will free them, but reality quickly set back. But even then, the numbers are not too bad. But what do you think? Like some of Pakatan Harapan's minister and member of parliament have to come out to defend Anwar Ibrahim. Is there a concern there, you think?
Yeah, I think definitely there is. It's almost like, don't look here because there's some treasure here. So
And Hadi Awang came out today and say, I predict the new government will collapse. So, I mean, not
quickly got
surprisingly,
backlash.
but probably there is some basis for that. I mean, we always knew this is a fragile government. But what do you think, and that's why it goes back again to the last year presentation of the budget. Is it because Anwar Ibrahim's hands are tied because of the need to satisfy all the different base? Do you get that feel, or do you feel like it's just...
I felt
Not
like
enough,
it's more linked to the group of advisors that he has.
Okay. So
It's almost like if your advisors are advising you this sort of strategies, and naturally, I think you'll be more inclined to listen to your trusted ones. Yes, I mean, there are some plates to juggle. I mean, with this whole coalition, unity government and stuff like that, I don't think it's too big of a factor than having to satisfy your own coalition. I mean, talking about like the AP, I mean, some of these parties, they do generally have that tendency. I mean, even talking about Rafizi, I think he has some tendency towards socialist sort of.
Socialist, welfare, handout.
So I won't entirely blame this on the need to, I mean, that his hands are tied because having to answer to all other party. Obviously, it's definitely kind of like attractive to most of this group of people. So I think there is that underlying sort of progressive, because he does present this whole budget as progressive.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that he'll use such a word like progressivism. So I think there is really that sort of tendency.
Now let's talk about reform now, because another criticism or description, depending how you want to describe the budget, was that this is an election budget.
Yep.
Now, of course, typically when you hear about election budget, you think about goodies, you think about direct giving out. Of course, this time they are even kind of eliminating direct cash handout, which is a slight improvement, but they still kind of say this pool money goes to this project and things like that. And really that is the summary of the story of Malaysia, right? There's a lot of money here, but somehow you just get the people able to squander that. We saw that with sports, we saw that with education. For the longest time, Malaysia spent the most in Southeast Asia for sports and education. And instead of getting world-class sportsmen and world-class education, we are like going more and more backward. And it's because this is what one of the commentator on the budget say. He said, look, instead of simple cash transfers to targeted recipients, so that's an improvement, there is a continuation of providing projects to specific groups. It's again very, very vague, with no obvious or transparent mechanism to do that. Isn't that the story of Malaysia? The wastage that Anwar himself have alluded.
Yeah.